Hey Node.js developers, enough talking, let's start building and let's start by initializing our React Native project. So for that, I'm on a Windows, so I'm gonna open terminal, Windows terminal. So now let's open the directory that we want to initialize our project in my case that's projects. So now that we are in that directory, let's initialize our React Native project by using npx React Native in order to get the latest version of React Native at the moment of writing this. So then init to initialize. After that, the name of a project, Instagram. And I also want us to start from a template, which will include the TypeScript. So just by starting with this template, we will not have to go through installation and setting up the TypeScript, as the template comes already pre-installed with it. So for that, I'm gonna do -- template, React Native template -- TypeScript. Make sure that you write it correctly, or you can copy from the down below. Okay, let's enter and wait a couple of seconds until React Native fetches, downloads the template and initializes our project. Okay, so once the project has initialized, I'd like to open it in Visual Studio Code. For that, I'm gonna cd in the directory, Instagram, and then write code and dot to open this current directory in Visual Studio Code. If you don't have the code alias, you can just open up Visual Studio Code manually and open the project from there. From File, Open Folder, and navigate to your folder and open from there. Now let's try to run our application from a terminal window from within VS Code in order to be able to see it on our device. So to open a terminal in Visual Studio Code, we can either go here in the top menu to the terminal and press New Terminal, or the shortcut is the Control and the tick under Escape button, or on macOS that's Command and that tick. So here we can do npm start. This will start our development server. And once we see these two lines to reload our application, that means that our development server is running correctly, and we can try to install our application on a simulator. To do that, we will need another terminal window, and to be able to keep this terminal running, we will press on this plus sign that you see here, and this will open up terminal window. We can go back to the previous one by clicking on the first bash and going here. From here, we can do npm run Android, and this will run our application on an Android simulator. You can do npm run iOS. If you're working on a macOS system, before running it on iOS, you will need to do one extra step, and that step is npx pod install iOS. Run this command if you are only on macOS. This will install all the native pods for your iOS project. And after that is done, finished completely, you can do npm run iOS. And this will run the application on an iOS simulator. So because I'm working right now on a Windows machine, I'm gonna work with the Android version. So let me bring it here so you could see it. It automatically opened an Android emulator because I have Android Studio and everything set up. By the way, if you don't, check out the Duolingo clone, because there we have environment set up for both React Native CLI environment and with Expo environment. Now let's wait a couple of minutes, because the first time it runs, it needs a little bit more time. And after that, we will be able to see it on our device. Finally, we have our application on our device. After a couple of minutes of installing, we have our application running on our emulator, which is really nice. We can scroll through it. We can scroll and see everything, how what's going on here. The next step that I want to do is to check if our hot refresh is working. So let's quickly open up.tsx and scroll down a bit here until we see some text. The text that we see on the page here. For example, step 1, we see it here. So if I write here hello world and save our file, our application should automatically refresh and display our newly updated text. So if that works for you, everything is set up correctly, and we can get started and look into the project structure. So yeah, before jumping into coding everything, I want to quickly go through the most important files of our application and folders in order to know where to find what. So I'm gonna start with the Android and iOS folders here. If I will zoom in a bit even more, like this. So Android and iOS folders are the folders for the native projects. So this folder, for example, Android folder, you can go ahead and safely open it with Android Studio. And from there, you can run the application on the emulator, on the device, you can debug and you can see all the logs. The same goes for the iOS folder. This folder can be safely opened in Xcode, and from there you can run it as a normal native iOS project. Usually, for example, when you have some bugs that are very hard to debug with normal React Native debugging tools, you can go ahead and try to run it from Xcode or from Android Studio, and in that case it might show you more information about what's going on there. Also, these folders are important whenever we install some libraries. In most of the cases, libraries have auto-linking and the installation is mostly automatic, but in some cases, for some specific libraries, you might have to do some changes for the native projects. For example, I don't know, in the Android build.gradle, you might add a new URL for the dependencies here, or you can go in the app source main Android manifest, and here you can, for example, add a new permission that your application will request, like camera or microphone and so on. But more on this we're gonna speak later, when we actually have to install some dependencies and when we have to do these changes. Just know that they are here, and here we will work when necessary. In most of the cases, the Android and iOS folder we don't touch, but in very specific cases we do. Okay, the next file that I want to highlight is the app.tsx, and this is the entry point of our application. Everything starts from here, and as we can see, the template that we initialized has a lot of code here, which we will clean shortly. Regarding the rest of the files and folders that we have here, they are very specific for some tools, for example, for Prettier or for ESLint, and I don't want to confuse you very much at the moment, and I'm gonna discuss about them later when we need to adjust some rules, when we need to adjust some tools, add some settings, and tweak some parameters. At that point, it will make a little bit more sense for you when we encounter an issue, and then I tell you how to solve it using the files that we have here in our project. Now, the next step that I want to do is I want to start creating the project structure and the folder structure that we are gonna use throughout the rest of the course. So I like to keep all the source code in a separate folder called src. Because as you can see here in the root directory, we have a lot of files, and it starts getting confusing if we mess all these settings with the source code that we will write. Okay, in the source folder, we will start with 3 important folders. This is assets, components, and screens. Alright, so these are the most important folders. Inside the assets, we're gonna keep all our assets, for example, fonts, and for that I'm gonna declare a new directory, and let's say images. are going here, or any other assets that your application might need, like sounds and so on. The components folder is a folder that will contain, as you can guess, all the components for our application. And here I'm speaking about reusable components that we can reuse throughout different screens and throughout different parts of application. Let's say a post component that displays a post, an Instagram post in our application. As you can imagine, it will go in this directory. The screens directory is quite similar to the components technically, because it will contain the same types of components. The only difference is that we will keep here only the logic for the screens. For example, the home screen will live here, the authentication screen will live here, and so on. This is just a way to separate what is a component and what is a navigation screen. Later on, if we will need other directories, we will gonna add them here, and I'm gonna speak about them later. Now let's open up app.tsx and clean everything here. Let's even better delete everything, and we're gonna do it ourselves. So the first thing we need is import React from React. Then let's define our application as a functional component, and we're gonna return, let's say, a view and a text hello world. Let's also make sure to import the text, because the view has automatically been imported from React Native. In our case, if it didn't, make sure to import view and text from React Native. And the last step that we need to do here in our application is to export our application. Export default application. And this will make sure that it can be imported by React Native and rendered here. Refreshing. And we see hello world here on the top. In your case, if your device has a notch and the text goes under the notch, let's quickly add some simple styles to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And I'm gonna do align items center. And also flex 1. Okay, just by adding these styles, which I'm not gonna get into details, our text is centered in the middle of a screen and everyone should see it. Now that we have a clean project, it's gonna be easier for us to get started and not getting confused with all the mess that was there. And one more thing here, which is probably not very important, but for some people can be confusing, and I want to clear it out. So the idea is that the React version 17 introduced a new JSX transform. And it's a bit complicated what's happening behind the scenes, but what that allowed us to do for developers, it's even funny for me, is it allowed us to skip is not having to import React library in all our components. So in React, this works by default. If you just remove React, it will automatically be imported behind the scenes. However, in React Native, this is not working by default. And if you just remove it, it will show you a red error, can't find variable React. So it's weird because our project is, if we look in package.json, is using the React version 17 here. So you might expect this to work, and for some people it's even easier, like not to have to import this React all the time. So let's set it up to forget about this, be up to date with the React.js community. If this works for you out of the box, kudos for you, that's very great, continue watching. Because I expect in future this to become the default in React Native. However, at the moment we will have to do some changes in our babel.config.js file. Just paste the babel config that I have here, which you can find down below the video, and you can copy paste it there. And the only thing that it updated is it used a new transform for React JSX with true and the runtime to automatic. So right now, if our application updates, it still shows us an error. Now we can go ahead and in the second terminal do npm run Android or iOS. Now let's open the terminal and let's go to the first terminal here in the right corner in order to go to the development server. Now let's stop the server in order to restart it. So to restart it, we will write npm start -- space -- reset cache in order for us to send the property reset cache to the React Native. We are using this command, and this will make sure to restart our server, but to reset the cache to delete everything that we had before. So now that we see that the transform cache was reset, which is good in our case, and let's do npm run Android. And now we see the same application hello world, but if we look at in the application, we are not importing React and it is being imported automatically. A lot of settings for a very small improvement, but saving like one line in every file that you're gonna write through the whole process of writing your project, it's gonna save you some time. So here we have it. Enjoy. Alright, that was it with setting up our project, initializing it. Now let's go through some of the tools that we're gonna use and how to set them up and what are they, and yeah, they will help us to have a enjoyable process throughout the whole course. See you.